I beg your pardon. I saw you admire this ring, and I thought perhaps you would like to have it.
What really happened to stars like Clara Bow, the original It Girl, who once ruled Hollywood but died forgotten? How does someone go from owning the screen to vanishing from memory altogether?
Even if you did, he wouldn't believe you. Why do you think he came back? For revenge?
Today, we're diving into 20 golden era stars who died in total obscurity. Their once bright spotlights reduced to shadows. Some names will shock you. Others you may never have heard. Yet every story hides a twist that will leave you gasping. Frances Farmer. Frances Farmer was once touted as the next big thing in Hollywood, an actress with the looks, the fire, and the kind of screen presence that made critics gush. She lit up films like Come and Get It and Son of Fury, and even played opposite Cary Grant. But her career was overshadowed by her reputation as difficult. What most people didn't know was that Frances was battling personal demons and a studio system that punished nonconformity. She clashed with executives, rejected the starlet image, and was famously arrested after a string of erratic incidents. The press tore her apart, painting her as Hollywood's fallen angel. Her life then took a darker turn. She spent years in institutions where treatment was anything but kind. While others her age were landing iconic roles, Frances was living behind locked doors. By the time she resurfaced in the 1950s, the Hollywood machine had moved on. She scraped together small television appearances, but the momentum was gone. In the end, she lived quietly in Indianapolis, far from the lights she once commanded. When she passed away in 1970 at just 56, she wasn't remembered as the star she once was, but as a tragic cautionary tale. Hollywood had buried her long before her obituary. Marie Prevost. Marie Prevost was the ultimate silent film darling, a Canadian-born actress who captured hearts with her bubbly personality and natural charm. She starred in dozens of films during the 1920s, working alongside heavyweights like Ernst Lubitsch, who considered her one of his favorites. At her peak, she was one of Warner Brothers' most bankable stars, her name shining on marquees, coast to coast. But as talkies stormed Hollywood, Marie's career began to slip. Her light, flirty screen image didn't translate well to sound films, and the industry quickly moved on. She turned to B pictures, often playing thankless supporting roles. As the spotlight dimmed, so did her fortunes. Financial troubles mounted, and the glamorous star once known for her vivacious energy was now struggling to land even the smallest roles. The truth is, Hollywood didn't just forget Marie Prevost, it discarded her. By the time she passed away in 1937 at age 38, she was living alone in a modest Los Angeles apartment, her glory days a distant memory. The contrast was shocking. Once courted by directors and producers, now gone with barely a whisper. Marie's story is one of the harshest reminders of Hollywood's cruelty. Stardom isn't a lifetime guarantee, it's a contract with an expiration date. Carl Dane. Carl Dane had one of those faces you couldn't forget. A towering Danish actor with a crooked grin, he made audiences laugh in silent classics, like The Big Parade and The Son of the Sheik. For a while, he was MGM's go-to comic relief, a lovable everyman who could turn slapstick into an art. Audiences adored him, and the studio plastered his name across posters. Then came sound. His thick Danish accent suddenly became a liability. While some actors adjusted, Carl found himself typecast or outright unemployable. Studios that once depended on him now acted like he never existed. He tried vaudeville, then farming, then even prospecting for gold, each venture collapsing in disappointment. By the 1930s, Carl was working at a hot dog stand outside MGM studios, serving the very employees who once cheered his name on payroll sheets. Passers-by recognized him occasionally, but most saw only a faded relic. The laughter he once inspired was replaced with pity. When he passed away in 1934 at age 47, his death barely made the trades. Hollywood, always hungry for new faces, had no time to mourn one it had already abandoned. Carl Dane's story is perhaps the cruelest punchline, a comedian left without an audience. Mae Clarke. Say the name Mae Clarke and film buffs immediately recall one moment, the grapefruit scene in The Public Enemy. James Cagney gangster Blair, locked in, famously smashes half a grapefruit into her face. That single image became one of Hollywood's most replayed clips, but tragically it overshadowed her entire career. Mae had talent beyond that humiliating breakfast table. She gave haunting performances in Frankenstein and Waterloo Bridge, proving she could do more than just play the moll or the victim. Yet studios never pushed her as a true leading lady, preferring instead to box her into limited roles. Her personal life was no easier. Struggles with health and finances left her grasping for stability, while her star slowly flickered out. By the 1950s, Mae was taking any small part she could get bit roles in television forgettable films, and even background work. The once rising star was reduced to fighting for scraps in the industry that had once hailed her as a face of the future. Mae Clarke passed away in 1992 in Woodland Hills, largely unnoticed by the public. For many, she remained frozen in that grapefruit moment, a cruel reminder of how a single scene can define and ultimately confine an actor's legacy. Lila Lee. Lila Lee was Paramount's golden girl in the 1920s, a bright-eyed ingenue whose beauty and charisma made her a box office draw. She co-starred with Rudolph Valentino in Blood and Sand, a career highlight that cemented her as a leading lady. Audiences adored her, and Paramount treated her like royalty, but stardom is fickle. By the 1930s, Lila's career began to sputter. Sound films brought tougher competition, and personal struggles drained her energy. Roles dried up, and she found herself drifting into supporting parts often uncredited. The same press that once adored her quickly lost interest. What's most haunting is that Lila lived long after her fame had faded. She survived into the 1970s, living quietly far removed from the Hollywood glamour she once embodied. When she passed in 1973 at age 72, most people had no idea she had ever been a star. Her story underlines a brutal truth. Fame isn't always lost quickly. It can erode slowly year by year until what's left is a name only die-hard historians remember. Lila Lee once shared the screen with Valentino himself, but by the end she was a ghost of an era no one was looking back on. Barbara Payton. Barbara Payton's career started like a Hollywood fairy tale. She was stunning ambitious and had the kind of magnetism that studios couldn't ignore. In 1950, she starred opposite James Cagney in Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye and was suddenly touted as a breakout star. She had the looks of a goddess, and the press couldn't get enough of her. But Barbara's downfall came just as quickly as her rise. Studio publicity machines built her up as the bad girl of Hollywood, and when the roles dried up, that label stuck. Instead of being remembered for her talent, she became a tabloid fixture. By the late 1950s, her career had collapsed. What followed was heartbreaking. Barbara drifted away from Hollywood, surviving on odd jobs and the occasional small acting gig. She lived in cheap motels and rooming houses far removed from the glamour she once embodied. When she passed away in 1967 at just 39, it wasn't front-page news. Her name had already faded from public memory. Barbara Payton's story is proof that Hollywood can crown you queen one year and forget you entirely the next. Louise Brooks. Louise Brooks wasn't just a star, she was an icon. With her jet-black bob haircut and magnetic screen presence, she redefined the image of the modern woman in the 1920s. Her performance in Pandora's Box remains one of the most celebrated in silent film history, influencing fashion and film for decades. But Hollywood wasn't kind to rebels, and Louise was nothing if not rebellious. She refused to play the studio system's game, turning down contracts and roles that didn't interest her. While others played along, Louise walked away. That independence cost her dearly. By the 1930s, her career was practically over. She spent decades working ordinary jobs, even as a sales clerk and dancer, while her name faded into obscurity. For years, no one cared that one of cinema's most influential stars was living paycheck to paycheck in Rochester, New York. Only late in life did film historians rediscover her brilliance. She wrote essays reflecting on her career, offering rare insight into the brutality of Hollywood. But when she passed in 1985 at 78, she was no longer a household name. Louise Brooks was remembered only by cinephiles, while the wider world barely noticed. It's almost cruel. The actress who gave us one of cinema's most unforgettable images spent most of her life forgotten. Harry Langdon. Harry Langdon was once mentioned in the same breath as Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton. A silent film comedian with a baby-faced innocence, he had a unique style that made audiences roar with laughter. In the 1920s, his films like Tramp, Tramp, Tramp and The Strong Man were box office hits, and studios hailed him as the next comedy genius. But Langdon's success was short-lived. Unlike Chaplin, his humor didn't adapt well to talkies. Worse, he feuded with his creative team and took too much control of his own films, leading to a string of flops. Hollywood moved on quickly, replacing him with fresher faces. He kept working mostly in short films, minor roles, and eventually writing gags for others. But the glory days were gone. By the time he died in 1944, Harry Langdon was far from the limelight. It's hard to imagine now, but there was a time when Langdon was considered comedy's next king. In the end, his story became a footnote, his name overshadowed by the very comedians he once rivaled. Virginia Rappe. Virginia Rappe's name is one most people know only because of a tragedy, not because of her work. She was a promising silent film actress in the 1910s, appearing in light comedies and gaining notice for her charm. She was well on her way to stardom, but fate had other plans. After her untimely death in 1921, her career was overshadowed by a sensational trial that dragged her name through the mud. Hollywood studios distanced themselves, and her actual films were almost forgotten. Decades later, few remembered that Virginia had once been a rising talent, with dreams of a long career. Instead, she became a symbol of a scandal-ridden era, her real achievements erased from the record. She died at just 26 years old, and yet her legacy was not her acting, but the whispers surrounding her passing. In many ways, Virginia's obscurity was forced upon her, a bright star extinguished before she could truly shine. Helen Chandler. For classic horror fans, Helen Chandler is unforgettable. She played Mina Seward in Dracula, 1931, standing opposite Bela Lugosi in one of Universal's most iconic films. At the time, it seemed like she was destined for lasting stardom. She had the delicate beauty and stage experience to become one of Hollywood's great leading ladies. But Hollywood is often cruel to women once they're no longer considered fresh. Helen struggled to maintain her career in the 1930s, taking smaller and smaller roles until eventually disappearing from the big screen. By the 1950s, she was no longer in films at all. Her later years were marked by personal struggles and declining health. In 1965, a fire in her Los Angeles apartment left her severely injured. She lived quietly afterward, largely forgotten by the industry that once put her face on posters. When she passed away in 1965, at just 59, most moviegoers had no idea the actress who once faced down Dracula had even been alive. Helen Chandler is a chilling example of how Hollywood legends can fade from public memory even when their faces are immortalized in iconic films. Florence Lawrence. Florence Lawrence is sometimes called the first movie star. In the early 1910s, studios didn't even credit actors by name, but audiences noticed her. Fans demanded to know who this mysterious actress was, and she became the first to be publicly billed. That should have guaranteed her a permanent spot in Hollywood. History. Instead, Florence's career burned out almost as quickly as it lit up. By the 1920s, new faces had replaced her, and she was struggling to find work. She invested in inventions for film technology, including an early idea for the car turn signal, but recognition eluded her. As the decades rolled on, the woman who had once been the most famous actress in the world was all but forgotten. By the time she passed away in 1938, very few people even realized that the first movie star was still alive. Her funeral was sparsely attended, a heartbreaking contrast to the adoring crowds who once followed her every move. Florence Lawrence was proof that being first doesn't always mean being remembered. Mabel Normand. Mabel Normand was once the queen of comedy. In the silent era, she wasn't just a star, she was a pioneer directing and writing her own films, at a time when women rarely held such power. She starred opposite Charlie Chaplin and Roscoe Arbuckle, and she helped shape slapstick into the cultural force it became. But scandals and whispers followed her, and her reputation took hit after hit. Even though she wasn't directly responsible for the controversies that swirled around her, Hollywood began to distance itself. By the mid-1920s, her star had dimmed, and roles became harder to find. Her health, already fragile, worsened. She lived quietly in a sanitarium for much of the 1930s, rarely appearing in public. By the time she passed in 1930 at just 37, her once golden name was tarnished, remembered more for the drama around her career than for the groundbreaking work she had done. Today, very few know that Mabel Normand helped lay the foundation for the comedy films we still laugh at. She deserved to be remembered as a trailblazer, but Hollywood left her behind. Clara Bow. Clara Bow wasn't just famous, she was the star of the 1920s. Nicknamed the It Girl, she embodied flapper-era glamour and freedom, capturing the spirit of a generation in films like It and Wings. Studios couldn't promote her fast enough, and audiences couldn't get enough of her charisma. But fame took its toll. Clara found herself hounded by gossip and crushed by studio demands. With the arrival of sound films, she felt out of place. The new technology combined with relentless scrutiny drove her to step away from Hollywood at just 28 years old. She lived for decades afterward, but not in the glow of fame. Instead, she retreated to a ranch in Nevada, raising her children quietly, while the world moved on without her. By the time she passed in 1965 at 60, a new generation barely knew her name. It's staggering to think about. Clara Bow was once the very definition of movie stardom, but by the end, she was nearly erased from the public memory. Pauline Stark. Pauline Stark was one of the most photographed women of the 1920s. Discovered as a teenager, she quickly rose to fame as a silent film beauty starring in Salome of the Tenements and The Cavalier. Her striking looks made her a fan favorite, and for a while it seemed like she was destined for long-lasting fame. But like so many others, Pauline couldn't transition smoothly into the sound era. Her career evaporated almost overnight. By the 1930s, she was appearing in bit parts, sometimes uncredited, as her stardom faded into memory. The cruel irony? Pauline lived into the 1970s, long after her heyday, yet she lived in near total obscurity, her name forgotten even by many who had once adored her on the silver screen. When she passed in 1977, at age 78, Hollywood barely blinked. Her story is the perfect example of how quickly the movie industry discards its former idols. Alma Rubens. Alma Rubens was another actress who shone brightly in the silent era. With her exotic looks and smoldering presence, she starred in dramas like The Gilded Butterfly and The Valley of the Giants, captivating audiences throughout the 1910s and 1920s. Studios sold her as one of their crown jewels, and for a time she lived up to the hype. But the pressures of Hollywood wore her down. By the late 1920s, her once promising career was collapsing. She struggled to find consistent work, and the gossip mill painted her as unreliable. While others made the leap into talkies, Alma found herself on the outside, looking in. Her final years were marked by isolation and decline, far from the glamorous image she had once embodied. She passed away in 1931, at just 33 years old, barely remembered by the time the Golden Age was hitting its stride. Alma Rubens should have been a household name for decades. Instead, she became one of Hollywood's many forgotten tragedies, lost in the shuffle of an industry obsessed with the next big thing. Ramon Novarro. Ramon Novarro was MGM's answer to Rudolph Valentino, the dashing Latin lover who could melt audiences with a single glance. He starred in Ben-Hur, 1925, one of the most successful silent films ever made, and for years he was one of the studio's most bankable stars. His charm, talent, and striking good looks made him an international icon. But stardom is rarely permanent. By the 1930s, Novarro's career had slowed. While he found some work in character roles, the days of top billing were long gone. Studios that once worshipped him no longer returned his calls. By the 1950s and 60s, he was virtually forgotten, his name, a faded relic of Hollywood's silent era. What makes his story particularly haunting is how quietly his later years unfolded. He lived alone, surviving on modest savings, and the occasional bit of work far removed from the roaring audiences who once cheered him. When he passed in 1968 at 69, the Hollywood machine barely paused to acknowledge him. Ramon Novarro went from international heartthrob to obscurity in just a few decades, a sobering reminder of how fleeting Hollywood fame can be. Hilda Bailey. Hilda Bailey was a celebrated British actress of the silent and early sound era, praised for her elegance and stage presence. She starred in films like Alf's Button and The Man Without Desire. And for a time, she was considered one of Britain's brightest cinematic hopes. Yet while American stars often enjoyed the benefit of global fame, British actors had a tougher climb. By the 1930s, Hilda's film roles slowed, and she gradually returned to the stage, working steadily, but without the glory that once surrounded her. Audiences moved on, and her name faded from the headlines. She lived well into the 1970s, long after her fame had disappeared. When she passed in 1971 at age 82, there were no retrospectives, no great tributes, just a quiet passing of a woman who had once been considered a star of promise. Hilda Bailey's story highlights how even talented, well-regarded performers can slip into total obscurity simply because time moves on and the spotlight shifts. Anita Page. Anita Page was one of MGM's most popular actresses in the late 1920s. She starred in Our Dancing Daughters alongside Joan Crawford and quickly became a fan favorite. MGM received thousands of fan letters addressed to her, and for a while she was one of the most beloved stars of the jazz age. But with the arrival of sound, Anita's career faltered. She made a few talkies, but her popularity never matched the heights of her silent-era fame. By the mid-1930s, her film career was effectively over. She left Hollywood and lived quietly, far from the fame she once enjoyed. What's striking about Anita Page is how long she lived after her stardom had ended. She passed away in 2008 at the age of 98, but by then very few people outside of hardcore film buffs even knew her name. The once beloved darling of MGM had been reduced to a trivia question. Her story is a powerful reminder. Even when you are adored by millions, time can erase almost everything. Jack Pickford. Jack Pickford had a name that should have made him a Hollywood legend. He was the younger brother of Mary Pickford, America's sweetheart, and he had the looks and opportunities to build a lasting career. In the 1910s and early 1920s, Jack starred in films like Tom Sawyer and Great Expectations, and his charm earned him a loyal following. But Jack never fully lived up to the promise. While his sister became one of the most powerful women in Hollywood, Jack's career was uneven. He often relied on Mary's influence to secure roles, and he struggled to establish his own identity. By the late 1920s, his career had fizzled, and he drifted away from the industry. When he passed in 1933, at just 36, his death was barely noted compared to the coverage that followed his sister. Jack Pickford's story is especially tragic because he was so close to Hollywood royalty. Yet he died in near total obscurity. His name should have shone alongside the greats, but instead it faded into the shadows. Olive Borden. Known as the Joy Girl, Olive Borden was one of Fox Studios' brightest stars of the 1920s. She had a vivacious screen presence and was often compared to Clara Bow. With films like Fig Leaves and Bad Men. She was considered one of the era's most promising talents. But Olive clashed with studios over pay demanding higher salaries than they were willing to give. In Hollywood, that kind of defiance was rarely forgiven. Her career quickly collapsed, and she was left struggling for work. In the years that followed, Olive lived far from the glamour of Hollywood. She worked ordinary jobs and battled hardship, her once famous name all but erased from the industry she had helped brighten. By the time she passed away in 1947, at just 41, most people had no idea that the Joy Girl had even been alive, let alone once adored. Olive Borden's story is one of the starkest examples of how brutally fast Hollywood can erase its own stars. And there you have it, 20 stars who once defined an era only to vanish into obscurity. Fame in Hollywood is a spotlight that burns bright, but it rarely lasts forever. Some of these names built the very foundation of the industry, yet ended their lives in silence. Which of these stories shocked you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like and subscribe for more forgotten Hollywood tales. Because the ghosts of cinema are never truly gone.